The topic of this presentation is procurement in the summer food service program. Generally, when we use the term procurement, it refers to purchasing goods and services. Procurement is an important part of operating child nutrition programs because federal dollars are being used to purchase goods and services. Therefore, sponsors need to understand and comply with local, state, and federal procurement guidelines to make sure the federal dollars are spent wisely. The procurement regulations were put in place to ensure that proper practices are used when purchasing goods and services. The procurement process is also in place to ensure that improper practices such as nepotism, improper awards, kickbacks, incentives, and other improper practices are not used when purchasing goods and services. We need to understand that competition is the basis for the procurement rules. Your program benefits when utilizing competition and can determine whether your program is a success or failure. We will also talk in detail about contract administration because it plays a huge role in the success of your program. So why is competition important? And why does it provide the basic framework for the regulatory requirements? The full and open standard of competition was established because of the strong belief that the procurement process should be open to all qualified contractors who want to do business with the federal government. Full and open competition means that everyone has an equal opportunity to compete for business. Would it be okay for program operators who are the stewards of federal funds to offer contracts to relatives or friends without any regard for whether it is the most advantageous, the most responsive, and the lowest cost? This is what happens when the opportunity for business is not full and open, equal, transparent, or has integrity. As a taxpayer, I want to know that my tax dollars are being protected and not being used improperly or recklessly. Leveling the playing field means that procurement are being conducted competitively. It means that all suppliers have the same opportunity to compete. Fairness and integrity encourage vendors to compete. Vendors don't want to compete when the process isn't fair and doesn't promote integrity. When the competition is fair and transparent, they can spend their time conducting their businesses rather than attending bid openings. The more players there are in the market, the more competition that exists. This drives costs lower and provides higher quality. If vendors know that others are competing for your business, they're going to provide you the best price possible. Program integrity is a high priority, and there have been many serious findings in the area of procurement during OIG audits. Our programs amount to billions of dollars, and procurement amounts to approximately half that cost. Competition is more than just about procurement requirements. Competition drives the procurement process. It's a multi-step process for obtaining the best goods and services at the best possible price. These steps are part of administering the contract. Effective contract administration ensures that the sponsor's procurement procedures are well thought out, reflects needs, are completed properly in compliance with regulations, and in the end are managed properly at the contract award level. The steps in this process include procurement planning, forecasting one's needs, choosing the appropriate procurement method, developing a solicitation, advertising the procurement, evaluating your proposals, awarding a contract, and managing the resulting contract and keeping your documentation. You can see that the procurement process is not just the solicitation and award of a contract. Awarding the contract is just the beginning of the process. Once a contract is awarded, the real work begins, and this is known as contract management. Each sponsor must have documented procurement procedures to ensure that free and open competition occurs, that the procurement process is open and transparent, and that the sponsor has the ability to compare procurements. The sponsor must maintain the procurement plan and records of all procurement documents on site for the state agency and/or USDA to review. The Code of Conduct form can be found on the Child Nutrition Program website and is a requirement for participation in the Summer Food Service Program. The Code of Conduct form must cover conflicts of interest and govern the actions of employees. It is required for employees that are engaged in the selection, award, and administration of contracts. The Code of Conduct prohibits employees from participating in the procurement process if there is a real or apparent conflict of interest. It prohibits employees from soliciting or accepting gratuities, favors, and anything of monetary value from contractors. The Code of Conduct must include disciplinary action to be applied for violations. Program integrity is a main focus of USDA. To that end, USDA has included procurement as an integral part of the administrative review process for all programs. The procurement regulations are not new. The concentrated focus on the procurement process and ensuring program integrity has been in effect for approximately 4 years. Unfortunately, we are still finding a significant number of sponsors that are not completing the procurement process for purchases, and others who are utilizing it incorrectly. It is for this reason that we continue to have trainings on this very important topic. This slide is an excerpt from testimony concerning the program integrity of child nutrition programs. USDA reported improper payments for 4 child nutrition programs to the United States Government Accountability Office. It is estimated that the improper payments totaled an estimated $1.8 billion in fiscal year 2018, just over 1% of the total payments of $151 billion. They also reported that since fiscal year 2013, the school meals programs have consistently reported the highest improper payment rates across the child nutrition programs. For this reason, program integrity will continue to be a main focus of USDA, and proper procurement is an integral part. Let's talk about allowable costs. For a cost to be allowable, the purchase must be necessary to operate the program. The purchase must contribute to providing a reimbursable meal to an eligible child. The cost must be reasonable. The cost must be assigned to the activity that benefits from the cost. In other words, purchases that were made for the summer food service program cannot be used in the CACFP program. The cost must be treated consistently across programs. If the purchase of a freezer benefits both the CACFP program and the summer food service program, the cost must be shared by both programs. If a cost benefits more than just the child nutrition program, the child nutrition program must only bear a percentage of the cost. For example, a central air conditioning system is purchased for a building that houses a kitchen and also has numerous classrooms. The child nutrition program must only pay a percentage of the cost. You must ask yourself if the cost you plan to incur is both necessary and reasonable. Ask the following questions before making the decision to procure products and services. How does the cost contribute to achieving the objective of the child nutrition program? Is the cost recognized as ordinary and necessary for operation of the program? Could the program be carried out without incurring this cost? Would a prudent person find the cost to be reasonable under the circumstances? Some additional questions you should ask are, would a taxpayer deem the cost to be reasonable? Is this cost charged at a fair rate, or do alternatives exist that may be more cost-effective? Does the cost deviate significantly from the established practices of the sponsor, which may unjustifiably increase the cost? Can the sponsor defend this purchase to the state agency, the media, and auditors? And of course, there's the ever-popular, how would you feel about this purchase if it was posted to Facebook? Some allowable costs are compensation of employees and fringe benefits, the cost of material and supplies, memberships, subscriptions, and professional activity costs, and conferences where the primary purpose is disseminating technical information and is necessary and reasonable for successful performance of the summer food service program. There are numerous unallowable costs such as promotion, lobbying, public relations, bad debts, depreciation, contributions, and donations. Additional unallowable costs would be the purchase of equipment and vehicles, the purchase of non-creditable food items, excessive administrative salaries, labor expenses for staff that have not been approved by the state agency through the online application system, and payments for audits that are not required by the state agency. As we discussed earlier, non-prorated expenses are unallowable. Also allowable is rent for sites. You are providing a service to the site and should not be paying their rent. Late fees, insufficient fund fees, and payment on loans are all unallowable. No payments for meals when on day travel should be charged to the summer food service program. The State of Louisiana Travel Guide provides guidance on allowable rates for lodging, meals, and mileage. This guide can be adopted for use by sponsors that do not have their own documented procedures. This is the main takeaway on the topic of procurement. Every dollar that you spend of the federal government's money must be procured by one of the three methods allowed by USDA. This slide demonstrates how the value of the procurement corresponds to the procurement thresholds. The small purchase threshold is $30,000. When the value of the purchase is estimated at less than or equal to $30,000, the informal methods, either micro purchase or the small purchase method, may be followed. However, when the value of the purchase is estimated at greater than $30,000, formal procedures, including sealed bids and competitive proposals, apply. Only the micro-purchase method does not require competition. However, purchases must be equitably distributed, with the aggregate cost must not exceed $10,000, and the price must be reasonable and the purchase must be necessary. Small purchases between $10,000 but less than $30,000 require competition, which means quotes must be obtained for the product specified from at least 3 bidders. The last procurement method is what we refer to as formal procedures. These are sealed bids or competitive proposals that require public advertising and are much more rigorous. All procurement procedures require documentation of how the solicitation was conducted, the responses received, how responses were evaluated and awarded, and the monitoring of contract performance. Sponsors must complete a cost-price analysis in connection to every procurement. This helps in determining whether you need to conduct a formal or informal procurement. A cost analysis must be completed for all formal procurements. Prior year cost records can be used. If a sponsor was under the $30,000 threshold last year, but is expanding the program, a formal procurement method may need to be used. The sponsor is responsible for making sure that the proper procurement method is being utilized. Let's discuss formal procurement. Your procurement plan is your guide for how you intend to conduct procurement. Formal procurement includes invitations for bid and competitive proposals. Remember that if you anticipate your expenses from a vendor will exceed $30,000, you must use one of the formal procurement methods. An invitation for bid, or IFB, uses price as the only factor. The contract is awarded to the vendor that meets bid requirements and is the lowest in cost. A formal bid for food and supplies are typically bid using an IFB because price is the most important factor. A competitive proposal, or RFP, uses award criteria. This type of formal bid might be used for procuring pest control services or repairs where service is an important factor. All formal procurements must be advertised in a regional news source. The newspaper of a large city in your area would be the appropriate newspaper to advertise. The newspaper from a small town should not be used because it is not going to reach a wide audience. In addition to advertising, the bid documents can be sent by mail or email to known prospective vendors. State law requires the procurement to be published twice in a regional news source, with the first advertisement being at least 15 days before the bid opening. The sponsor may also want to publish the bid utilizing an electronic bid system. The advertisement must contain a general description of the items to be purchased, the deadline for submitting questions, and the date that written responses will be provided. Also, the date of the pre-bid meeting and if attendance is required must be included. A pre-bid meeting is not required, but if you plan to have one, it should be included in the advertisement. You must include a deadline for submitting proposals, both the date and time. The address where the solicitation can be obtained must be included in the advertisement, and as always with any information provided to the public, the USDA non-discrimination statement must be included. The bid document must include detailed information about your bid. It must include the contract period, the date, time, and location of your bid opening, how the vendor will be informed of the results, and the terms and conditions that each bidder must fulfill to be evaluated. The bid document must also include benefits to the sponsor if the contractor does not perform as contracted. There must also be a statement in the bid regarding the return of purchase incentives, discounts, rebates, and credits that must be returned to the summer food service account. If the sponsor is going to allow piggybacking, it must be included in the original bid document. If the sponsor is going to allow an de-escalation of prices based on a cost index, that also must be included in the original bid document. The document must also clearly define the method of evaluation and the type of contract. Any specific bid procedures must also be included in the bid document. A statement must be included that requires the sponsor and vendor to give access to all program documents to the state agency, USDA, or the Comptroller General. The document must also include a provision requiring the contractor to maintain all records for 3 years after the final payment. The sponsor must provide a description of the order process that will be expected from the winning vendor. The bid document must also include the statement of non-collusion, debarment and lobbying certificates, and lobbying activities. These are required of all vendors and should be signed and included when the vendor returns the bid documents to the sponsor. And lastly, the sponsor must provide detailed specifications and estimated quantities they intend to purchase. The sponsor should provide as much detail as possible to ensure prospective vendors are bidding on the exact same items. If you're utilizing an RFP, a set of weighted award criteria in the form of a weighted evaluation sheet must be included. There's a sample in the procurement plan. Award criteria are included but may be changed by the sponsor as needed. Price is not the only factor, but it must be the primary factor in awarding an RFP. Price must count for more than any other factor. Again, this type of procurement is typically used when a service is involved. It's not typically used for the purchase of food and supplies, where vendors are bidding on the same products and price is the important factor. The contract is awarded to the bidder whose proposal is both responsive and the most advantageous to the sponsor. The bidder that receives the highest number of points based on the award criteria is awarded the bid. This is an example of an RFP scorecard. Each criteria carries a weight. The sponsor determines the importance of each criteria and applies the total possible points for each criteria. Remember that price must always carry the most weight. USDA requires certain provisions to be included in all formal contracts. They include administrative, contractual, or legal remedies for breach of contract, termination for cause and for convenience, the Equal Employment Opportunity Provision, and the Davis-Bacon Act. Additional provisions are contract work hours and safety standards, rights to inventions, the Clean Air Act and the Federal Pollution Act, debarment and suspension, and the Byrd Anti-Lobbying Amendment and Certificate. The provision for procurement of recovered materials in the Minority Businesses, Women's Enterprises, and Labor Surplus Firms Act must be included. Geographic preference is not typically allowed in formal procurement. The geographic preference can be used as an additional scoring criteria to provide preference points for the purchase of locally grown or raised agricultural products. When utilizing the geographic preference to procure such products, the sponsor has the discretion to determine the local area to which the geographic preference option will be applied. Additional contract provisions include the requirement that the vendor must comply with the civil rights laws. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Age Discrimination Act of 1975, Title VII, CFR Parts 15, 15A, and 15B, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and FNS Instruction 113-1, Civil Rights Compliance and Enforcement in School Nutrition Programs. Let's move on to small purchase procedures. Summer food service programs, except for charter schools, have a small purchase threshold of $30,000. You also need to know if you have a local small threshold that is less than $30,000. If not, you will use the state small purchase threshold for procurement. When utilizing the small purchase procurement method, commonly referred to as quotes, you must have written procedures and specifications and provide them to each vendor. These specifications should provide clear and accurate descriptions of all products and technical requirements. Price quotes must be obtained from at least 3 responsible and responsive vendors, and of course you must document all quotes and maintain them on file. When awarding small purchase procurements, the sponsor must award to the responsive and responsible vendor that has the lowest price. Responsive means that the vendor submits a bid that conforms to all the specifications and terms of the contract. Responsible means that the vendor is capable of performing successfully under the terms of the contract. All procedures used in the small purchase procurement must be documented and maintained on file. Let's discuss micro purchases. The micro purchase method is typically used for emergency purchases. It's used to purchase supplies or services where the dollar amount of the purchase does not exceed $10,000. To the extent practicable, the sponsor must distribute micro purchases equitably amongst qualified suppliers. For example, you go to Walmart for an emergency purchase of food that's needed to serve the meal. So the next time you have an emergency purchase for a food item, you need to choose another grocery store. Micro purchases may be awarded without obtaining quotes if the sponsor considers the price to be reasonable. The micro purchase method is not to be used in order to circumvent free and open competition. In other words, the micro purchase method of procurement cannot be used so that you don't have to obtain quotes or formal bids. If you're using the micro purchase method to purchase food over and over again, you should be using the small procurement method or the formal procurement method. The next type of procurement is the non-competitive proposal. The procurement method is used if items are available only from a single source, when the award of a contract is not feasible under small purchase, sealed bid, or competitive proposal. Prior state agency approval is required for any and all non-competitive proposals. contracts that have been awarded by the State of Louisiana Office of State Purchasing may only be utilized by the sponsor if all of the federal requirements are met. See Memo Number SFS 1879 for the requirements for using state contracts. The sponsor must have applied for and received approval from the Louisiana Office of State Purchasing in order to use their contracts. Before beginning the procurement process, the sponsor must determine the method of procurement they need to use based on the estimated dollar amount to be spent. Take this example. Last summer, the sponsor purchased meats, frozen items, pantry items, and chemicals from the same distributor. The dollar amount spent during the previous summer was $24,000. It's estimated that food costs have increased about 3% this year, so we're estimating we will spend about $24,700 during the summer program this year. The sponsor can do a formal bid or small quotes because the estimated amount we are spending is less than the $30,000 small purchase threshold. If we serviced 4 sites last year, and we intend to have 2 additional sites this year, we would probably want to change to a formal bid. If we know from the start that our expenses will exceed the small purchase threshold, we know we must do a formal procurement. In this example, meat, frozen, pantry, and chemicals were purchased from the same distributor, and the expenses totaled $75,000. So we know that we've exceeded the $30,000 small purchase threshold and must do a formal bid. As we discussed before, an invitation for bid is normally used because price is the main factor. When you have a finding on procurement during a state agency review, it's very important to correct the issue. If the state agency comes back to your organization to review your procurement documents at a later date, and the problems haven't been corrected, the state agency can determine the finding as a serious deficiency. The state agency or USDA could determine that fiscal action needs to be taken. This could include requiring repayment of all reimbursement of meals during that procurement period. Repeat findings on procurement could also result in termination from the summer food service program. As we discussed earlier, proper procurement is a main focus of USDA. We're now going to switch topics and discuss how to write bid specifications to clearly and accurately describe the product that we want to procure, including the quality, pack, and quantity, to provide the prospective vendors with the most accurate information possible. If we estimate inaccurately, vendors may not want to do business with us again. If we do not write detailed bid specifications, we may get frozen chopped broccoli instead of the fresh broccoli florets that we really wanted. This is a 4-week menu for the summer food service program. I'm operating 4 sites and estimate that I will serve 200 children at each site for a total of 1,000 children. I need to write bid specifications for each item and ingredient on the menu. The first item I need to procure is ground beef. We're using ground beef in meat sauce, tacos, and sloppy joes. Of course, the first thing I must review is the recipe for each item. The recipes used in the Summer Food Service Program must be standardized recipes, and they must include component information. There are multiple resources for recipes that include component information. This slide shows the web address of several sources of recipes. This recipe for spaghetti and meat sauce came from the Mississippi Recipes for Success. The recipe for spaghetti and meat sauce calls for 10 pounds of ground beef to serve 57 children a 2-ounce portion. Note under the ingredient tab that my recipe calls for ground beef with no more than 20% fat, or what we typically call 80-20 ground beef. You can use this information to write the specification for ground beef. Also note that the recipe does contain component information. The crediting information tells me that if the spaghetti and meat sauce is prepared utilizing the recipe, it will credit as 2 ounces of meat alternate, 1 ounce of grain, and 3/4 cup of vegetable. Make sure that it is served in the portion size stated in the recipe. The portion size here is 1/2 cup of spaghetti and 2/3 cup of meat sauce. To determine how many pounds of ground beef will be needed for 1,000 servings of meat sauce, you divide 1,000 by 57. The result is 17.54, so you round to 18. Then multiply 18 times 10. The result is 180 pounds. Since meat sauce is served twice during the monthly cycle, the total pounds needed is 360. The recipe for taco meat mix calls for 10 pounds of ground beef to serve 100 children. That is a significantly different amount than what was needed for meat sauce. Note that the recipe for tacos includes cheese, so part of the meat component is coming from the ground beef and part is coming from the cheese. To make the recipe for taco meat mix, 10 pounds and 10 ounces are needed for 1,000 servings. Round up to 11 pounds and multiply 11 times 10 for 1,000 servings. 110 pounds of ground beef are needed to make tacos. Tacos are served twice during the cycle, so 220 pounds is needed. Ground beef is also being used to prepare sloppy joes. 8 pounds and 10 ounces are needed, so So we'll round this up to 9 pounds. If 9 pounds is needed for 50 servings, multiply by 20 to obtain the amount needed for 1,000 servings. The total is 180 pounds. Adding the total pounds needed for each ground beef item, we estimate that 760 pounds of ground beef will be needed during the month of the summer food service program. Using the information we've obtained, we're writing a bid specification for ground beef. We've determined that a 20-pound case is how it should be packed. The ground beef can be fresh or frozen and can contain no more than 20% fat. 760 pounds is needed, and we want each vendor to price the ground beef per case. Pricing per case, as long as the size case is specified, makes comparing prices much easier. We also need to purchase spaghetti to go with our meat sauce. Spaghetti is needed twice during the cycle. The recipe calls for 5 pounds and 9 ounces of spaghetti for 57 portions. Round up to 6 pounds. If 6 pounds is needed for 57 servings, then 17.5 pounds or 18 pounds is needed for 1,000 servings. 216 pounds total is needed for the cycle, since spaghetti and meat sauce is being served twice. Spaghetti is added to the bid specifications. 220 pounds or 11 cases at 20 pounds each of regular enriched dry spaghetti is needed. Green beans are needed for the menu cycle. They're being served twice during the cycle, so 2,000 total servings is needed. The portion size is 1/4 cup. Using the Food Buying Guide calculator, it's determined that 45 cans of green beans is needed to serve 2,000 1/4 cup servings. The food item as purchased also provides the bid specifications. Number 10 cans of green beans were chosen, and we selected heated, drained beans because they are being cooked and lose volume when cooked. Green beans are added to the bid specifications. We are purchasing green beans in number 10 cans. There are 6 number 10 cans of green beans to a case, so we know that if we need 45 cans, we will need 8 cases of green beans. We're telling the vendor that we want them to provide the price for a case of green beans. Apples are served 4 times during the menu cycle, so we need 4,000 apples. $125-count apples are being used, which means there should be 125 apples to a case. If 4,000 apples are needed, that is equivalent to 32 cases. Apples are added to the bid specifications. 125-count apples come in a 40-pound case, and 32 cases are needed. Granny Smith apples are being used, and the grade needed is U.S. Fancy. Milk is needed each day, and each child must be offered a milk. The estimate is that 20,000 milks are needed. If 20,000 cartons of milk are needed, and you divide by 48 cartons per case, 417 cases of milk are needed. It is planned that 60% will take chocolate and 40% will take white milk. Once calculated, milk is added to the bid specifications. The sponsor would continue writing bid specs for all items and ingredients needed for the menu until all are included. Once they are complete, they can be used in either a formal procurement or in small quotes. This screenshot shows a number of USDA resources for procurement. All USDA FNS memos are posted to the LDOE website as soon as the state agency receives them. The resource section of the CMP website under the Summer Food Service Program has additional resources that you can use for procurement. Additional guidance can be found at 2 CFR 200.318 through 200.326, Appendix 2 to 2 CFR 200, 7 CFR 210.21, and the document Procurement in the 21st Century. The state agency is willing to provide technical assistance to any sponsor to assist them in completing procurement correctly.